for generations we've always there's people that's always been saying there's no get rich kind of a scheme. There's no best way to instantly become rich. And people keep falling into that mindset. Why? Because they're lazy, they don't want to work, they are looking for the the most benefits with the least amount of work. And it's that kind of mindset that kind of destroys people and gets them into these traps. I would not blame the industry for advertising it. I blame the people who want an easy way to get rich. That's really the problem and the issue. And so in that case, it's not lying in a sense. It was always promotion.
Hmm.
And it's not, they didn't they didn't say that this is going to happen for everyone. They're just saying that this particular person did X, Y, and Z, and therefore got this amount. Okay, we're starting, and you're you're gonna be taking us off because we're talking about something, and I don't understand the terms for it. What was it?
Well,
You
I think
What's
we
the
gotta make
definition for
a.
it?
I think we gotta preface it where this topic in particular today is going to be a little more, I guess, controversial and a little bit more uncomfortable,
Okay.
but we can recognize that it exists out there in the ether, especially with how the culture is shifting, with how social media has been affecting people, Instagram, Facebook, and all that jazz, and how we are now being kind of shifted into being
Mhm.
one particular niche of the culture, and that is simp culture. So, Chris, have you ever heard of that term before?
I have not. I didn't even know what a simp actually was, or what exactly it means. I
Man,
probably still don't.
I'm surprised that you have never heard of this before. But
Hey, consider me an oldie. Like I was probably born in Gen Z, but I'm probably my spirit feels like a boomer, but I don't identify as a boomer.
well, I
Don't give
feel
me.
like this is also very like yeah, it's like a millennial, like kind of later millennial, early Gen Z kind of thing, though. Like it's just right
Okay.
up your alley. But the definition, let's say, of a simp is someone, often a man, who is perceived as overly submissive and attentive to someone they are romantically interested in, often to the point of being perceived as desperate or lacking self respect.
Hmm.
So, with that being said, I mean, I think we could all.
How would overly be described? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, there's falling for a girl. Of course, you do things for her, and there's things that might be above average, but is still socially acceptable. How overly absurd is absurd? Like,
I think it
give me
comes
an
down to the
example.
point of, in particular, maybe even giving money uh, to the person that they like, and this is kind of going to be
Isn't that
going.
you're describing dating culture? Isn't that?
This is going to be, oh, that yeah, that's a good point. But I think it's also the recognition, like the emphasis on lacking self respect, such as let's
Hmm.
say, I mean, just the idea. Okay, you mentioned dating culture. Let's think about it where if you're going to go on a first date, what is the
Okay.
appropriate dollar amount for a first date? What do you think?
Okay. So saying if I was living in the U.S., I would say I'm not even sure if it's a big number or not. I think $50 would be appropriate. That's including both your meals, and I think even uh, getting some dessert or drinks afterward. I think is appropriate, and I think it might be a little much. And
Okay.
that's living in Hawaii. I'm thinking considering dating in Hawaii, which you have to remember Hawaii is like one of the most expensive states, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would say like just as a number, yeah, like a range. Yeah, I think around $50 is good. But then I
Okay.
would say somebody going like 250, 200 plus, right? With someone
Okay.
they've never really met is a little much. And I'm just not saying um like they're
Right.
flaunting their wealth or anything. It's one of those at a certain point it just doesn't make sense, especially if it's gonna be a first date. And obviously there's nuances to this, but as a general rule, like if you hear let's say $1,000 on the first date, it sounds kind of fishy. And then particularly this where it's lacking self-respect, if that is like your budget for the month, if that's
Mm-hmm.
essential money that you're going to be needing, and then you're going to be using that for a luxury, which is like going on a date, using that instead of maybe taking care of basic necessities, that's where you're kind of going to that simp culture. But going further to that dating world, there's also the idea of I like of obviously people can make a lot of money in the internet in different ways, and I
Right.
think part of that simp culture, I think the majority of it, that simp culture is like um, paying for particular services to see certain things,
Call it
right?
as it is.
All it as it is. And so one of the biggest sites for this, let's say, is OnlyFans. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is going to be a perfect um, representation of what a simp is. I mean, the internet has a lot of good and bad, and in particular, it's one of the oldest professions where people would sell their bodies for money.
Hmm.
And I think that is a very obvious sign of what a simp is.
Right,
Uh,
right off the bat, like, why do you think a sim, like you mentioned, sim culture and how OnlyFans has contribute to that? Uh, let me ask you first. Why do you think it's a bad thing? It's not like we've had this before OnlyFans. I want to say before OnlyFans existed.
yeah,
Why do you think it's a bad thing? You give your take and I'll give mine.
yeah. Well, I think in particular, it's bad for both parties.
Okay.
It incentivizes the wrong kind of thing. It particularly for guys. I mean, um, obviously there is a power dynamic if you have more wealth, um, but it incentivizes and kind of makes, I guess, girls go for the wrong kind of guy. In particular, like although somebody could, you know, give a lot of money for X, Y, or Z, but then at the same time, that's they're using up everything to do that rather than like saving. And in particular for the girl, they are kind of giving up their self respect um, to be able to do this kind of thing. And it's not I'm not necessarily saying there's a good or bad for these people. Rather, it just incentivizes a certain behaviors that is not conducive to create a better society. In the case for guys, I mean, the majority of the guys are the ones paying. In the case of OnlyFans, about 71% of their audience are guys. And so, what does that incentivize? It incentivizes guys to, in particular, pay for something that is free as well. That's something that I want to emphasize, where it's kind of weird. Oh, I think more than anything, guys that are lonely more are going to be more into this, and they're going to uh, kind of fill
Mhm.
that void of loneliness into that particular niche to kind of fill it. And I mean, I just think it's negative on their part. It's gonna in the long term. It's like I don't see how that's beneficial for them or the girls per se.
I think
And
you go ahead.
yeah, it just becomes a power dynamic that I don't think society is gonna be conducive to begin creating like families or helping one another. I think rather it kind of just objectifies people, human beings, and it kind of makes them see them almost like just animals, which in the long run is going to be not a good thing.
I'm gonna go back to that when you said about about objectifying women, because there's an interesting branch into feminism that really talks about that. And I'll show you what some of the things that I came across, but that's for later. I think when you mention it, you're talking about a loss of self respect and how it's not ideal for building families and building. We have to remember families are
Well,
very
at the same
important,
time,
right? Yeah.
I don't want to say I can see it from the point of view where what if you don't want a family? That's fine. If you don't want a family, that's like you have the right to believe that and think that and try to not have a family. But I just think it's also not a great thing when people's values are dependent on their net worth. Like there's a level of I guess humanity that you can't really put a dollar value amount to, where and also I think it becomes addicting. I think if you ever have to like pay for something like that,
Mhm.
I just think that I think there's almost like a barrier where once I mean I'm gonna speak for the guys because the majority of people that do this that pay are
Okay.
guys, but I feel like there's almost uh, like a gate where once you officially pay for something like that, where it's essentially free in the internet, right? Uh, and like if you really want to look at things like that, it's going to be
Right.
free, it's going to be accessible, but like to pay for it, I think it kind of puts you into a dangerous slope in which you kind of are more limitless in what you're willing to pay for. Um,
Hmm.
and it's almost like a drug is how I see it, where like okay, like it's not that bad that you paid X amount, now you're just gonna up it, and you're trying to fill that loneliness. Like more than likely, most people that kind of do these things that pay for these kind of services don't have the attention that they're looking for, and so um, they have that pseudo feeling that they have that connection with those creators, and then what happens, it becomes almost like it's essentially a parasitic relationship between that creator and then their audience. And what's worse is, I think it's also been romanticized so much in not just the particular website, but rather in movies and in other creators or celebrities, where it's kind of
Hmm.
like softcore activities that they're showing off, or what they're promoting, and then
Right.
it leads people to doing those things. I mean, one of the things that I want to point out is how almost OnlyFans has been increasing in terms of the creators, almost like a little less than a million per year,
Hmm.
and the majority of these people are from like the ages of 18 to 34. So
Yikes.
especially those people that are just like 18, like do you think that they wake up one day and feel like, oh, I'm gonna be a creator for this? Like no, like it takes time and preparation. This is the
Right.
kind of a big deal, right? Like to putting it everything out there, potentially ruining some like work relationships or things like that. And so like I kind of reverse that question to you, Chris. Like who do you think is more what who do you think is contributing more to this simp culture? Is
Ooh.
it going to be creators or consumers of the creators?
In any business and anything that you do that earns money, if there is no demand, there would be no supply for it. That's just basically the way that it works. And in the case of for in the case for suppliers of that feed into this simp culture, that feed into even OnlyFans and encourages creators. What
Oh,
was
I'm
attractive to
so
these
sorry.
creators?
I have to interrupt here. I don't want to just say OnlyFans as well. I forget to mention that I do believe like more of these accounts are like in Instagram and X, and
Right,
I'm
but
sure
like
it exists
any
in the other social media. I just don't want to bar it from just OnlyFans.
no, absolutely. Like any provider, any content creator that tries and feed into this and tries to monetize from this would not be attracted to such an industry if there was not a high demand that would pay such a high amount for these creators. Again, the thing that made it attractive was the money. And so if there was no such demand, then the money wouldn't be there. It wouldn't show that there's a there's a great demand for it. And so I think if I have to blame one of the two, it's definitely the demand at fault. Now it's also a different question when you say that we should eliminate demand. I don't know how that's like realistically possible. It'd
Well,
be great if we didn't have it, right?
I'm not
But
saying that
like,
we should
yeah.
necessarily eliminate demand. I think there is a level of accountability that
Hmm.
primarily for me, like when I asked that question, primarily it's the consumers in my mind that are the biggest problems to this. I mean, because when you really think about it, right, the consumer has to give some, like they has to give, in this case, like money. How did
Right.
they, like, they had to take the time out of their day to first create that money,
Hmm.
to then voluntarily give it to somebody for their attention. And I think that's actually just degrading for the guy as well in general. Um, and I think there's a lot of like a power play in social media recently where, you know, like a guy is able to do that. I mean, they have a lot of power, but I think it's actually the
Hmm.
opposite. Like imagine somebody working their butt off, like, presumably a guy, um, creates a business at 20, you know, works hard, becomes successful. He's now like 40 years old or something, right? So he created all this money, or all this wealth, let's say, and he's practically giving a shortcut to one of those creators, let's say, and
Hmm.
giving them stacks of money. And it actually, I think it devalues him as a person, because it is showing like it took him years to get to a certain point where maybe like a couple thousand is no object to him. But what does that show for the girl? Like, I mean, that she's taking that shortcut using him as like a stepping stone in a way. And we all know it's more of a parasitic relationship between the audience and
And who are
the
you, wait,
creators.
let me clarify. You're referring the parasite to the creator or the
Oh no, no,
demander?
more of the consumer, because
Okay.
now they're kind of imagining that they have a real relationship with this creator, when really, and at the same time I don't blame the creator for this. It's just like how celebrities to the audience members are, like the audience members can feel the creator, the celebrity, like for example Taylor Swift, like her pains and her sorrows growing up with her. But Taylor Swift really
Hmm.
doesn't know who that audience member in particular is. But it's not her fault that, like, there's that almost feeling as if, hey, that person's my friend, or like we've been close for a while because like I saw you grow up in a way, or in this case, like I've seen like certain things that are considered sacred, let's say. And so what happens is, for the guy side, like they're devaluing themselves because now they're using, like objectively, like they're using the time and their effort into something that that's no longer an asset. It's
Wait,
almost
so let
like,
me
you know,
clarify. You're trying and you're attacking
well, I'm not
demanders. Like
attacking.
like no, no, not attacking, but like you're trying to what's the term I'm looking for? You're trying to address, or you're trying to, is the term discriminate, or is the term like go against the people who are subscribe or demanding for these or subscribing
Well,
for these, is
yeah,
that
I
right?
think the more than anything, what the what I'm saying is like the main contributors of this sim culture is primarily the guys,
Okay.
doing this in particular. Like, um it's almost, you know how like the term nice guys finish last. It's like
Yeah.
those nice guys, um
I wouldn't even
it,
call them nice guys.
well, no, I'm not saying that those guys are nice guys, but what I'm saying is that the guys that are willingly able to are doing this, like they're really just cutting off their own feet, like their foundations, because then in the real world, like it takes time and effort and energy to kind of build up to a certain level of wealth. And what's happening is, it's kind of the people that are able to do these things are a lot older, and then so it kind of shifts the mind, I guess, of the dynamics between the men and women in what they're looking in a partner. However, I mean, when I with that being said, I think the most important thing in a relationship like that is going to be the transparency. And I mean, there's also all these different stories in which maybe like a particular creator is making so much money.
Mm.
I think it OnlyFans is like maybe like 300 plus million people, 300 plus people that are millionaires. But then recognize that the majority of creators only has like 21 subscribers, and let's say a subscriber is like maybe $5. So and that's monthly. That's the kind of money you can't live off that money. So for the vast majority of people,
They're paying
they
a lot.
like I particularly feel bad for the creators. Like yeah, like they're probably gonna do that, yeah, like with the assumption that they can make all these millions, but that's not the case. It's almost like being an athlete where it takes a level of dedication and time, but at the same time only like the creme de la creme is actually taking in the majority of the benefits.
I actually wouldn't feel sorry. So don't get me wrong. So there's a saying, or you're kind of going off the point that you think that simp culture and the demand for this is bad and
Is a
should
The
be stopped.
drivers are the guys,
Okay,
the
you're right.
consumers.
And the other thing is, let me try and address that, and let me try and address the one where you said if you feel sorry for the suppliers or the people who go on these platforms to try and earn money.
Well,
First of all,
I
for
want
that
to
later
clarify.
question,
I
yeah,
want to clarify. I don't feel bad per se. Like I feel like they've been lied in terms of this particular dream. I feel like with society pushing that, because once again, it's not like somebody just wakes up and become and decides to do this. Especially, I think in our time in this culture, I can imagine teenagers 15, 16, 17 hearing stories of the creme de la creme of those creators and
right.
thinking like, wow, like that's really easy. Like um like there's the particular niche on like these different websites, but like foot fetishes or something. It's like, oh, somebody's making thousands of dollars with taking pictures of their feet. It's like, oh, I can do that. I can do this, and then it starts escalating. And not all of them are like that, but
See, but this is the
enough
thing, though. I don't think it
enough.
was lying.
How
Like,
do you mean?
I don't think it's lying. It's just basically marketing, and any marketing and anything plan. You're always trying to advertise the most appealing. You're trying if your purpose is trying to get more people in this platform, then you have to make it very very appealing, especially for these people who want to do this career. And in any case, I don't think that it's wrong to be able to say like, oh, this is to advertise the most appealing, the most successful side of the story, because that's just basically people doing their jobs. I think the responsibility and accountability should fall on the people who are coming into these platforms expecting to earn a lot of money. Because in any culture and anything, this is not just with only being an OnlyFans creator or any social media creator that advertises women's bodies. This is any get rich kind of scheme.
Hmm.
We are already preaching, and we have constantly been
I'm not
telling.
preaching anything. I'm just
Yeah,
saying my
like
opinion.
we there's for generations we've always there's people that's always been saying there's no get rich kind of a scheme. There's no best way to instantly become rich. And people keep falling into that mindset. Why? Because they're lazy, they don't want to work. They are looking for the the most benefits with the least amount of work. And it's that kind of mindset that kind of destroys people and gets them into these traps. I would not blame the industry for advertising it. I blame the people who want an easy way to get rich. That's really the problem and the issue. So in that case, it's not lying in a sense. It was always promotion.
Hmm.
And it's not they didn't say that this is going to happen for everyone. They're just saying that this particular person did X, Y, and Z, and therefore got this amount. They just didn't show the dark side of it. And we already know this. Like, this is every sane
Well,
person already knows that marketing kind
yeah,
of over stretches it.
I would agree. Like obviously one should like market the best case scenarios,
Hmm.
and no, that's not always going to happen. But I think primarily what kind of irks me is that in this particular industry, we kind of know
Mm.
that the majority of creators in this are actually people that have been sexually assaulted. Like that's gonna be a little bit more like that
Wait,
word
wait,
itself. Really,
repeat that again. The people who were
most creators, most people that get into this kind of work have been
okay.
sexually assaulted in some form or another.
Is that
Um,
before or after they went on the platform?
I mean, before,
Before. Okay.
yeah. I mean, something really interesting about the human psyche is that when somebody has experienced something sexual of nature, when they're much younger to like better understand it, if they've been sexually assaulted, um, two generally speaking, that individual becomes two like one of two things. They can become because of that experience, they become asexual or they become hypersexual. And in the case of this particular brand, this niche in the market, more than likely it's like they've been hypersexualized in seeing or having experienced something crazy of that nature that they weren't yet prepared to see. And so that's kind of irksome, kind of disgusting, to be honest. But at the same time, like I understand you're saying that there is a level of accountability there, but there needs to be like a level of understanding. But overall, the biggest issue is that there are people spending thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to these creators, and it skews what a normal relationship is, or like what even success kind of starts appearing to people. And obviously, I'm saying that the most of the accountability still comes to every individual. Like when you see something in, let's say you're watching a TV show, and then an advertisement comes up. It's not like you're some
Mm.
brainless individual that's like, oh, it wants me to buy like cookie dough. I'm gonna have to go buy cookie dough. It's like, no, you have your accountability. You have
Yeah.
a will. You have a will. You're an individual person that can act. And in those cases, like when people see those things, advertising, and even though there are people are more inclined maybe to for a particular vice, let's say, it's still their responsibility. But I think there's that understanding that like, well, a lot of these creators have experienced some sort of thing, and especially with social media on the rise now. I
Mm.
mean, we all know that there are iPad kids, uh, people that are unable to really focus now, like in elementary school, like babies that throw tantrums if they can't see like their iPad minis, things like that.
Coco Melon.
So imagine, like, I mean, I said sexual assault earlier, but it's also just anything that they're really not yet prepared, and then their minds get fixated on that. Imagine how
Mm.
easy it is in an iPad to maybe like search something innocent sounding and then skewed in a certain way, and then it just takes a click. And then and now what do you do? Like that's not something you can necessarily erase. Um, and
Thing
to
is,
be
like,
honest,
I
one of the crazier stats as well is just like maybe like 1 in 2, like 1 in 4, 1 in 5, or even like more people, women have been sexually assaulted. And it's like you don't really think about it. As a guy, I know I was more like in shock knowing about this kind of how outlandish that number sounds like, because like, whoa, like
1 in 4, really?
along those lines. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like there's actually it's at the bare minimum that, if not even more. But so when you think about that, it's like, so for every 4 people that I see, there's like a girl's like it's gonna have been sexually assaulted. Yeah, and so especially now with social media, and what I mean by sexual assault, I think it's also one of those things where people could send things easier now to other people without their
Mm-hmm.
consent. Like there's so many ways. I don't want to get into the semantics of it, but it happens. Now what do we do about it? But in the case for this, like what happens is now people are, rather than like kind of having that feel of guilt, like now it's a feeling of success if you're gonna get into that level,
It
right?
sounds like you. It sounds like you're linking simp culture to the creation of this this ease of access, or make it easier for women to be sexually assaulted. Like there's a I'm still having trouble seeing the connection there, because I find, for me at least, I don't think simp culture or simps, like any simp individual,
Mhm.
has any damage to a society. And this is why I think that. Okay, when you're over obsessing over women, and when you're willing to pay for it, you keep feeding yourself this ideology, this fantasy of what romance and a relationship should be. And do you know that scripture verse? There was a scripture verse in Isaiah, Isaiah 29 verse 8. I just looked it up earlier. It was saying there that when a hungry man, he dreams that he was in a buffet and he eats everything. He wakes up and he's still hungry. And when a thirsty man, he dreams that he's drinking like this fountain of water. He wakes up, he's still thirsty. It kind of goes back into that same analogy. Like with these people, they're dreaming, or they're paying for this overly romanticized this false relationship, that in the end they still end up as this lonely person who is not able to change, who doesn't change anything about themselves. And the tendency is for if a guy is for guys like this, right, if they're unattractive, if they don't work on themselves, they no one really wants to mate with them, no one really wants to reproduce their kind of offspring, and that line just kind of cuts off. Like that's I get that idea from the theory of natural evolution, where humans are the way they are because certain cultures have died off because it didn't help them survive. And for this simp culture, if it's not going to be helpful for people to survive, then it's just going to die off. And I
Well,
don't think it will have any
I don't
impact
think it'll.
long term
I
for
don't think it's gonna
society.
die off. No, because I think what has happened, and to be honest, to be a simp is a luxury. And what I mean by that is we have reached a point where you can survive, you can be alive because, like, even working minimum wage, like you can survive. Like fairly easily, all things considering. Like, this is
Okay.
gonna sound very elitist, but that meaning like you can survive. Like, and the most important luxury that we really need, it looks like, is just an internet connection and a phone, right? I mean,
Okay.
we have so much technology, and in the United States, in particular, they're the ones that are the most consumerism. They consume the most of this and give out the most.
Right.
There's
Okay.
enough luxury there that a lot of people, like, when they're not gonna necessarily die off. Like, I mean, they're not gonna die off as if like if you were lazy, there's no food, and so you are just gonna like straight up die off. Like, you got to actually learn something. In this case, you don't need that. What's gonna happen is you're just not applying yourself, and you're not able to, I guess, provide for a family. But then a lot of people don't really want that anymore. And so what's happening with the sim culture is that you're kind of just you're putting into a pedestal people that don't have as many responsibilities. And with those, what it looks to be lesser responsibilities, it's like something that you want to strive to be or strive to become. And it shifts the relationships between a man and a woman, in that for a woman, they're particularly looking for more of the materialistic. And that's fine, but it does shift. If that's the case, I mean, the guys will try to shift to become a provider of those materialistic stuffs. And then it
Mhm.
kind of takes down some of the structures, the foundations that before people weren't as money minded, but now, like, they're more economically minded, so that all their actions kind of equate to money. And I just think it's not a good system to have for guys. Um, it's almost like you're gonna work out, in particularly not for health benefits, but like for girls. And initially, that's actually fine. Like, it makes sense, but then there's like a level of maturity and maturing that happens in the middle of that, or maybe much later to it, in which it's not as you'll recognize that you should do it for yourself
Right, but then
rather
again, it
than
just
for
goes
others.
back to like it just damages the individual, not a society in general. And when you mentioned earlier where it's easier to survive, that's the thing. Like, if you want something to last, it's not just surviving that's the problem. It's also the fact where you have to reproduce offspring to have like that mindset, how your brain is wired to be kind of copied or mimicked into your children,
Hmm.
is needed for that culture to survive. And so with for Simps, basically, like, yeah, it's easy for them to survive, especially in a world where everything, like when we argue like everything has become much cheaper relatively to that how it was before, and it's easier to stay to live longer. But it's also harder to find someone to reproduce with. Like
I don't
that's
think so. Like specifically the creation of a child, yes, but then the act of creating a child, I don't think it's as difficult now as it was before.
the act of creating a child. Like, really?
Just intercourse. I think that in particular with sim culture, it's easier now, um, if you could afford it, really. And although, like, I think it's illegal in the United States and in many states, I think
Hmm.
I'm sure it happens. You know, I'm sure it happens in the name of, like, this is really interesting. Where in like that's not, you cannot do that, but then if you video it, it becomes considered art, and that is why it's very much, there's a lot of it out there, and it's legal.
Hmm.
Like that, the video itself is legal, but even though prostitution, I think in the majority of states is highly illegal. So
Okay.
there's a shift there, and it's just one of those things where, like, it's it kind of shifts like what a guy should want and also what a girl should want. And in particular for the girls, I think in general we've recognized that guys are more physical, but then what kind of kept them in the straight line is like the woman being a lady. It's like, okay, so like they're kind of
Mm.
shaping them to be less uh, animalistic, I guess, for guys. But
Yeah. Okay.
now there's been that shift where like guys are guys, but they should be more, they
Feminine.
should be more, not necessarily femme, but like they should be like more tame, I guess, let's say.
Okay.
And then, well, for girls, like we're telling them to be a girl boss, be like a guy, and now there's not much of that, like that filter. But back then, for example, guys would not curse in front of a girl. Like there's something ungentlemanly about it. But
Right.
now there's been that shift, so that there's no more, there's no longer a, how do you
Like
say,
obstacle or prevent
like,
filter or
this is gonna
prevention.
sound bad, but like there's no longer a collar. Like
Okay.
for the guy, like there's now everybody has no collar, and everybody's just kind of going around, causing more chaos rather than like having that level of uh gentleman like
Like
gentlemanliness,
chivalry.
chivalry,
Yeah.
yeah, that a guy should have. Because I mean it's being lost. And then the problem with it also is, if people have not experienced a real life, they're
Mhm.
basing on what they're seeing in the internets, in the, like,
Okay.
in a lot of the fake videos that happens, and they assume, because they don't have real life experience, like, oh, that's what's going to happen in the future, so then I have to act a certain way. And obviously there's that level of accountability, but imagine living your life in like that. I remember, for example, I'm just going to equate this to like the prank videos. I remember as a kid watching some of these prank videos and thinking, well, they're real. It's like, that's really wild. Like a lot of the popular prank videos, like, that's really wild. Or like the prank, the guy picks up a girl because showing his Lambo, or whatever, right? Like there's all these prank videos that happens, and I assumed that they were real because I haven't reached that age where like I can even think about like buying a car or whatever, and things like that. But then being in the real world is like, oh wow, like that is obviously fake now. Like you can tell what is fake, but then
Mhm.
a kid is still trying to create their worldview, and seeing that these are popular videos, they're gonna assume that's real, and it's hard to tell
Uh,
them like, hey, that is fake because X, Y, and Z. And that's why it's gonna be even more difficult. Like for example, now like there's gonna be more AI videos.
when
It's
you
gonna
say
be
kids,
harder
how
to
what
tell.
age is your reference? Like, give me like help me get something firm to grasp on. What's the age when you're saying kids? From what age to what age?
I'd say that from the age of like 6 to 12. 6 to 12 is a
6 to 12.
kid.
Okay.
And then, I mean, there's teenagers as well. They're still formulating their worldview. It's almost
Okay.
like if you're a kid, there's all these high school movies, right? Maybe you'll even think High School Musical, even, right? It's like,
Okay.
oh, so high school is gonna be like that kind of like High School Musical, where people are gonna be this or that, or if you watch a more darker side of like those high school movies, the bullying and this and that, that's
Hmm.
what you're going to be assuming is the real world. But the actuality, from my experience, everything's a lot more tame. It's not what the movies are saying, like the
No, it's not
bullying,
some.
like that level of like
Mhm.
craziness. It's like,
Right.
oh, is it just for dramatic effect? But as you're living it, you didn't recognize that. Like,
Yeah, you tend to overreact, and yeah, it does become hard to shape your worldview. I see, but the thing is, like, I don't blame it on simp culture though. Like, if we're going back to simp culture and saying, this is going on the internet, and it's framing the ideology of what is reality for young minds, I would not blame Sims for this. The thing that I would
mm,
actually blame and go
mm,
target is parents and is
mm,
parents. I would first demand accountability and change from parents because there's a lot more that they can do. But again,
mm,
like these things exist, right? Like we have to consider what is most realistic and what is
mm.
easiest to change. There's
Well,
thousands of
that's no, that's really funny you say that. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I actually think the majority of Sims are not kids per se. Like I'm talking about like these
right
Sims as if they're like in their 30s,
40s
40s,
and 50s.
50s,
Yeah,
even 60s. Like, because these are people that have the means to become a Simp, like
right,
to be the tip of the of that culture change, because they have
right.
the means to change what the expectations are.
Yeah, but you're requiring tons of these people to change something that they deeply desire and is deeply ingrained within them. It's already become, if we're going by like addiction, as they said, because they're already paying for it, it's become harder to change. And what's more realistic and what's more possible to change is the access that these children have, and that parents need to be more involved so that we can be able to better model and shape their worldview in what is actually real instead of what they see on the internet
Wait,
as
I think we gotta, 'cause like I said, the Simps are like in their 30s, 40s, 50s.
right.
So we were talking about their parents. We're talking about then like 30 years ago, which the internet did not really exist at the time. Like,
No,
see
no,
what I mean?
not like not simps who grew up. Like if children, like children in general, children in this day and age.
Oh,
If your
okay.
argument is that because of simp culture, there is more content that's being circulated that would appeal to them, and therefore romanticize or fantasize reality instead of showing what the world actually is, then the parents of today who have kids from the ages of 6 and 12 whose worldviews are still being
Mhm.
shaped, who have access to the internet, it becomes their responsibility, the parents of today, to ensure that they help with their household, their children, step by step, and understanding that the internet is an over exaggeration of what real life is, not the
Yeah.
parents of those simps like years
Yes.
ago.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, does
Yes.
that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes, and I fully agree with that. I would fully agree to it, but at the same time, there is that level of accountability for me personally. Growing up, it's like that accountability started at the age of 8, and there was always
Okay.
that fear of I should have known better at the age of 8. But I can recognize that many cultures don't have that at all, which
Hmm.
is kind of makes sense. But at the same time, in the United States, there's also too much of a an issue where like once you turn 18, it's almost as if anything before 18 is a get out of jail free card. It's like no, there's a level of accountability there, and if somebody at the age of 17 did something wrong, it's like, oh, the parents did this or that. It's like, how old were you really when you could like start formulating and thinking for yourself? It's
Right.
only
Okay.
the legality of it in the United States, which makes it almost like a liability to have a kid. It's like, hey, I would say, generally speaking, that like at the age of 14 is when you have more of that adult-like features, adult-like thinking, like the process of it. And then I think we shouldn't really like. I would attribute more of the actions of the individual for
Mm.
once they turn like 14, getting closer, like legally 18, but like even 16 to me, I'm like, you're practically an adult in certain ways, um, and you shouldn't use that as like as a shield, like
Okay.
just because like you're legally underage.
What I would say to that is like there's an extent to I would agree. Actually, for me up till 8 years old, I think I think at any age you can still blame your parents. But it doesn't really do you much. It doesn't really do you much service or good. I think starting at the age of 8, you already have to start learning and to start trying and testing things out. But you really can't blame like legally in any country or almost any country. You can blame anything upon the heads of the parents up to the point where a child is up to 18 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I would establish in my household is that at the age of 8, you start I think we misinterpret, like society misinterprets this. At the age of 8, they need to be starting to be accountable, and it's at 18 where they get more freedoms, they get more liberty. I don't see it as the standard or the bar, like, okay, yeah, you're now up to 18, you were accountability free. I think of it as like up till 8 you were accountability free, and 18 you just get more privilege. Why? Because during those 10 years in between, you should have been learning and you should have been accumulating modeling your mind as to how the world works, and then be prepared to more interact with the world. I think it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, that we have people who would blame their childhood trauma
Yeah.
for how they are acting the way they are right now. And I'm not even talking about like teenagers. I'm talking about full grown adults, because you know what? That model, the people that I see right now who are my age, who blames their parents for their mishaps, I saw them doing that during their teenage years, and I wouldn't be surprised if they keep using that same excuse. You keep feeding it's going back to this ideology. You keep feeding yourself this fantasy of what the world should be and refrain from taking responsibility for your actions. That leads you to going into this loop, kind of.
Yeah, I actually I like the way you framed it, where you cannot use your trauma as a shield or even a spear to attack society as a whole,
Right.
and kind of just protecting your bad actions because of something that has happened, many years ago. And it is very valid. What has happened, something there's some crazy things that has happened, in people's lives, but you cannot use that as a tool against another individual for like saying why you can't be taken, like why you can't have responsibility for your actions now. And I think this goes with every. I think this kind of just comes down to like to the individual, um, recognizing that not everybody is dealt the same hand. But then, like you said, what good does it do you if you keep saying that you have bad hands? Well, what good does it do you if saying that your your mom is the reason, like your mom not loving you is the reason that you can't be successful, or your dad, being an alcoholic is the reason why you're not successful? Because then let's go to the opposite of that, like you were saying. Okay, that's true. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of issue that kind of happens where, well, where how do you move on from there? Um,
Like for me, like if like the when you're saying the exact opposite, like even if uh like I really think that we shouldn't for one, there's a Filipino culture where it's like yung ginagawa mo to, anong titingnin ng mama at papa mo, like to translate is like what you're doing is a reflection of what your parents are teaching you. I'm like I I I think there's some truth to it, but also like that saying is kind of removing accountability from the child. Like we're saying like, oh, this person achieved X, Y, and Z, it's because he had good parents. Like that's a Filipino culture kind of a thing, and it's kind of bad. It's very bad in a sense. Like even used for good or bad, it takes away the efforts or underestimating the actions of the child as well. Like when you say when it goes to the opposite, where we say that the parents are the reason that the child is successful, is overlooking the efforts and the amount of time and resources dedicated by that child into this. And I think in Filipino culture, parents are too busy taking pride in that action to actually acknowledge, no, I didn't help with anything. My child was the one who did that. It was not because of what I taught. It was because he or she took accountability. It's so easy. This is something that's very cringy to me. Like it's so easy for a parent to own up to a child when they're doing good and to disown a child when they're
oh
not.
yeah, well, I think it's just human nature, right? I don't think it's a Filipino, like I don't think it's an East or Western thing,
Okay,
but
maybe
more
because I was
so.
just exposed to
Oh,
Filipinos,
but
but
more
yeah.
so actually, Western culture is that like once you turn 18, you're kind of on your own, in which it's crazy to me. Like when they're actually on their own, it's like, hey, you have to pay rent now after 18. It's like what, or like you have to move out or something, which from the Eastern perspective sounds really crazy and really actually like un unloving. But
Mhm.
then there's something about that culture also where the individual, like you're focused individually, that you are now able to learn a lot more and not as overburdened, I guess, with
Mhm.
parents' expectations, things like that. I mean, I see it from both sides there, but in the level of success, I think it makes sense that people in the West have that more individual level thinking, while the East is more collective. And because of that collective thinking, there's that fear of acting a certain way and be ostracized by your family.
Mhm.
I mean, kind of going back to what we've been talking about earlier, like if you're there is a level of empathy and understanding, like what would happen if you didn't grow up in a great family, right?
Mhm.
How would you have to navigate your life when your um like the models that you kind of grew up looking towards are the people that you should not be living their life? Like what if, like looking in
Like
the
say
future now, right? What if your parents were like those kind of models, it's like how it's like their sins are not yours, but the recognition, like
you're
what
paying
they've
the
done.
consequence for it,
Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of hard. The thing that I remember the most, there was this video that circulated online about a woman who's like, there was a creator on OnlyFans and she was doing pretty well for herself,
Mhm.
and she was talking to her brother. There was this interview where she was
Oh
talking to
yeah.
her brother. Yeah, you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like she was kind of scolding him, like you're not doing well in your classes. And the guy was like, "You're an A student, but like you're doing OnlyFans, and like I get bullied because my sister is on OnlyFans."
Oh
And
yeah. Mhm.
it's my sympathies for the guy. And honestly, there's other things about wives being on OnlyFans, and they're saying like, I'm a woman, I can do whatever I want. This is something that earns money for me. I honestly feel sorry for those husbands as well, because it's If you
Well,
think
I
about it,
don't think they're
it's the
necessarily innocent either, because I mean they could be pushing that as well, right? And also with the story about the guy, actually, from what I remember, is
right.
it's like he's applying to university, but I think there's a level of um, like there's a reputation in his name or something that
Right. I didn't know about
he's
the
like,
university
or
part.
maybe not the university. Like he's thinking about going to university, but he's already kind of defeated in the thinking that like he probably can't because of the notoriety of his sister.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
because like if you become successful, everything is shown on a spotlight. You're put under a spotlight where everyone will attack everything, especially your family. If you're the only one who's successful, they start looking into your family and look at the mistakes of your family. And if you're trying to stand up as a socially upstanding man who benefits, like who contributes to society, they will find weaknesses in your family lineage, or in this case, the
well,
guy. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
I I
it's
don't think it's
demoralizing.
really that big of an attack though. Like when I see that, I think it's more of the shame that he. I think it's more in his mind that it's probably going to affect him, like affect
Right.
his university application. But like for sure, it's going to affect him socially. If anything, it'll be socially because of
Right.
like that level of notoriety.
Yeah.
And
Imagine like seeing that. Like it's, oh yeah, I was on OnlyFans. I subscribed to your sister. Like how
yes, I
crushing that
think
would
that's
be.
one of those
That's
things. Yeah. Well, we're talking about that, but then what happens down the line now when it's going to be like
your
your
mom or your
parents?
like,
Yeah, and it's like,
you lose so much respect for
well, this is
them for
where
one.
this is really interesting because like bullying is not good, but to be honest, this is gonna be there's a certain level to it that needs to
Go
kind
ahead.
of
Go ahead.
come in. There's a
Yeah,
certain
I
level
would
to
agree.
it that I mean, I think one of the more like degenerate stuff that I potentially like have saw like in my high school was like people like wearing like my high school was actually very tame, so there wasn't anything too crazy. But like
Okay.
I've seen things where people wear like what is it like ears, like animal ears and like tails or something, and it's like that's weird. And there's a certain level to it where um not necessarily I don't know, this is kind of hard to say per se, like in a politically correct way. Like they were looking like furries, and there's a certain level of disdain that you kind of should show to kind of to discourage that, and because I think part of that people doing that like the maybe like furry ears and with the tails, they shouldn't be proud of it per se.
I mean,
But
for if
it's
we're going into that, yeah. So, when you reference to bullying, and I think it's kind of hard
I
because
mean
bullying in
maybe
those
bullying's not
days,
the right word, maybe bullying
or
isn't the
like
right word.
discriminating. There's no nice way to seeing it, or for like this dismembering this anyway, like not having them in your social group. There's some sort of norm there's it's a double-edged sword where not accepting people into your social group, where you don't allow for these bad standouts and outliers to join in and to influence society. But there's also like, what about those who are genius who just can't really get along with people? It's also eliminating that out, and you're just having everyone as average and equal. If you want to have super amazing bright people, and you want to have people, you want to encourage those people to grow and to really flourish, who will at this in some future time be able to greatly benefit society, then you're also going to have to deal with the other negative outlier, where there's going to be people who's going to be a
Yeah.
detriment to society. And so you really got to take your pick as to whether you want it or not. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, in that kind of a scenario where it becomes very hard. Like for that guy, like, yeah, there's some sort of bullying, but like we also discourage it because it might hurt some other individual who's also trying to do some good, but it just doesn't really fit into that uh, friend group.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean we kind of got off topic about it, but it's just there's a level of promotion. I don't want to. I want to make sure
Hmm.
my words are said carefully here. Like, there's a level of this day that should actually happen. Like in a way, we need the Karens in the world sometimes. We need the Karens in the world sometimes that would like yell at the neighbor who's having a loud party at night to be like, keep it down. Like, you know what I mean? There's
Right.
a certain level of that. And although like we kind of meme on it, like people that are willing to follow the rules, like a
Right.
face adversity. At the same time, there are rules that are stupid that like maybe we should overlook. And I think the majority of people say, "Oh yeah, we're going to overlook it," but then there's a level of we need the level of those Karens to kind of keep things in check sometimes when it needs to be kept in check.
Hmm. You think like one of the greatest damaging things when you mentioned about what if these people, these content creators, start to have children, which for
Well, I
me
think yeah,
it becomes very hard to raise this kind of this kind of household because it's you lose respect for the parents in that sense. And I can't, for me, if you ask me what the solution would be, I'd honestly just say like I don't know. For me, at least in my personal space, if you were involved in some area, like I would try and avoid that. And it's like it's a very case by case kind of a
yeah.
scenario. Like I can't have you can't have a one size fit answer that kind of addresses that and would say, oh yeah, this is the best for society as a whole. It becomes very very hard.
Well, I
You
think what's
know,
going to happen is it's going to be justified more and more. I think it's going to almost be in a
really.
case where you know, like we kind of idolize our parents maybe or like our grandparents because we don't see there's not a camera in every pocket at the time,
Hmm.
so we don't so we only see and hear the good stories that have been told,
Right.
in those lifetimes. But now, like, imagine kids now being able to see when their parents were like in videos, in clear good videos when they were like
Right.
kids as well, because like I you barely see any photos from your parents when they were kids, like, except for like special moments. And so it kind of you kind of elevate them to a higher level, and then but now being able to see that human beings, like even like the people that you idolize,
Hmm.
they're just also human beings, and like that makes mistakes or makes silly things. And especially now when everything is being documented, um, you could be caught for doing like something. The standards could change down the line 20 years from now, and maybe wearing a particular thing or having a certain costume in at a certain Halloween could get you in trouble, or saying something while you were intoxicated could hurt you down
Yeah.
like 20 years down the line. And so there's a lot of this, but I think now we're coming to a level of common sense in a lot of the really basic things, like the common sense of, I think if we're gonna hear something said race, like somebody says racist things intoxicated 20 years ago, I think common sense would say they're not racist. Like, you cannot use that as that they are racist now.
Hmm.
Although a lot of people would still use that level of logic, the opposite of that. I think we've come to a common sense where like, no, that's not the case. Um, but who knows what's going to happen down the line in the future? Like, what if we're going to be more like the United States becomes more like Great Britain, in which you can actually be jailed
For free
for
speech.
for saying the wrong things in social
Right.
media. And so we'll
Yeah.
see how that is. But yeah, like I think my last thoughts regarding the OnlyFans and just that kind of culture is like, as an 18-year-old, 18 to 25, you probably won't recognize the impact, the consequences, the compounding
Mhm.
consequences of what you've done. And maybe some people, I think a lot of people maybe just try it out, but then find that it's not for them. but it's
Mhm.
still out there. And so it's there's a level of forgiveness that I think like we have to shift in our minds. But at the same time, like tolerance does not mean acceptance per se.
Mhm.
And so we can tolerate it, but like recognize that it's still bad. And I think as long as we have that anchor, I think like right now we have a general anchor that it's not a good thing. But once if we ever lose that anchor where we're now justifying that because maybe a lot of the creators are now facing certain consequences,
Mhm.
and in a way, like their kids don't deserve that, don't deserve the hate, and so now like they'll have to justify, and then now society is going to shift into justifying that it's actually a good
Right.
thing. It's a good thing because now they're able to afford X, Y, Z. It becomes one of those things where you just got to call it out what it is, and like you gotta take it, you gotta be brave and be bold about it. I think now we're having more of that common sense thinking because honestly I think it's because of this new presidency, and then it's very there's so much political like left and right. If you like something, then 50% of the America should not like it.
Mhm.
It's still very divisive, but certain things, actually it's not as divisive anymore is what I mean. For example, transgender athletes, um, like it's so interesting that guys are transitioning to be girls to participate in girls sports, but not really the other way around. 'Cause for guys to transition to girls to beat records is more common than the opposite of that happening. And then if you just think about it in a common sense way, it's because now they're competing at a lesser level than what they should be as a guy.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean that statement is still kind of in hot water, but I think at this point in time, we've reached a point where like that's so basic and common sense that it's not gonna really get you in hot water. And to be honest, I think like that's the majority like that's not really that divisive anymore because it's actually a popular opinion. It's just the minority of people are screaming the loudest.
I would argue that for at the current moment, we're already in the justification phase where we're already saying like why this is good. Like creating such content for Sims is already beneficial because yeah, monetary value. But I would also argue that I'm a believer in humanity. I believe that society in general is inherently good and that there is a type of goodness, a conscience for good deep ingrained within every individual, and somehow that may or may be lost, but there's still a conscience within everyone. But I would think that when we do get to that phase where we try and say it's right, there's still going to be a pushback that says it's wrong, and that there are individuals who we're able to see the fruits of their labor. You can
Yeah,
call an evil tree good as much as you like, it's not going to stop producing rotten fruit. And goes back to the scriptures that says by their fruits ye shall know them. So only time can really tell. I really think that those who avoided this in their prime years will get to benefit and reap good fruit, and we'll see that in multiple generations, in the generations to come. And so we're going to see down the line who becomes better and who doesn't, and what the reasons for it. For now, we're in an interesting period because before we didn't have as much data collection. Now data collection is pretty much everywhere, and so generations from now it's going to be hard to disprove that something bad is good and saying that something good was bad. So it's going to be an interesting time when that happens. But until now, stay true and to stay strong. And we'll see you guys until the next episode.
yeah. Thank you.